The shopping cart rattled against the linoleum floor. Harold's weathered hands gripped the handle tighter than necessary, knuckles white beneath paper-thin skin. 78 years old, and every step was a reminder of the shrapnel still lodged near his spine from Da Nang. The German shepherd beside him moved with practiced precision, amber eyes scanning the grocery store aisles with the same vigilance Harold once used to sweep jungle paths for tripwires. But nobody saw a hero that Tuesday morning. They saw an inconvenience. The service dog, Rex, wore his official vest proudly. The patches were regulation, the training impeccable, the bond between man and animal forged through necessity and deepened by mutual respect. Yet the teenage cashier's eyes rolled skyward when Harold approached, fumbling with his veteran's discount card. The woman behind him in line sighed audibly, checking her phone with theatrical impatience. "Sir, you need to move your dog," the cashier said, not bothering to look up from her screen. Her voice carried that particular blend of authority and indifference that retail workers perfect over years of dealing with what they perceive as difficult customers. Harold's voice came out smaller than intended. "He's a service dog. He's trained to—" "I don't care what he's trained to do," she interrupted, finally making eye contact. "Store policy says animals need to stay out of the checkout lanes." The silence that followed was deafening. 23 people in earshot, 23 Americans who heard an elderly veteran being dismissed like a nuisance, 23 citizens who chose to study their phones instead of speaking up. The woman behind Harold actually stepped back, as if Rex's presence might somehow contaminate her organic produce. Rex remained perfectly still, his trained demeanor unshaken by the mounting tension. His dark eyes never left Harold's face, reading micro-expressions that spoke of a pain deeper than any war wound. This was the pain of being forgotten, of having your sacrifice reduced to an inconvenience in aisle 7 of a suburban grocery store. Harold's shoulders sagged slightly. The same shoulders that once carried a wounded brother soldier 3 miles through enemy territory. The same back that took shrapnel meant for a kid from Ohio who was writing letters to his sweetheart back home. The same hands that signed up to serve when his country called, never asking what he might lose in return. But they had no idea what that dog had been trained to do. The morning had started like any other for Harold. Wake at 0500 hours, even though retirement meant no reveille. Old habits die hard, especially when they're burned into your soul by 2 tours of duty and a Purple Heart that sits in a drawer because nobody asks about Purple Hearts anymore. Rex had been waiting by the bed, tail wagging softly, ready for their morning routine. Walk the perimeter of the backyard, check the locks, assess any overnight changes to their small world. Harold lived alone now. Martha had passed 3 winters ago, and the house felt cavernous without her laughter filling the spaces between his silences. The kids called every few weeks, but they had their own lives, their own battles to fight in boardrooms instead of battlefields. Rex had become more than a service dog in those quiet months after the funeral. He'd become Harold's link to purpose, his reminder that some missions never truly end. The dog's training was extensive, specialized, expensive. Months of careful conditioning to recognize Harold's PTSD episodes, to interrupt nightmares, to provide stability when the world tilted sideways without warning. Rex could detect changes in blood pressure, sense panic attacks before they peaked, guide Harold through crowded spaces when the walls closed in. But his most remarkable skill, the one that took longest to perfect, was something deeply personal between them, something the grocery store was about to witness. If you believe that dignity doesn't retire with age, that service dogs deserve respect, and that our veterans have earned better than this, hit that like button and let me know in the comments, because what you're about to see will restore your faith in the power of respect. The cashier was reaching for her manager button when it happened. Harold whispered something, barely audible above the store's ambient noise. A single word, spoken, with the quiet authority of a man who once commanded respect through actions instead of demands. Attention. Rex's transformation was instantaneous and profound. The gentle family pet vanished, replaced by something magnificent and solemn. His shoulders squared, his head lifted, his entire bearing shifted into perfect military posture. Then, with deliberate precision that silenced every conversation within 50 feet, Rex lifted his right paw to his forehead, a perfect military salute. The German Shepherd held the position for exactly 3 seconds, the same duration Harold had been taught in basic training 57 years ago. The same salute Harold had given to fallen comrades, to officers, to the flag that flew over firebase camps where boys became men and some men never came home. The cashier's jaw dropped. The woman behind Harold gasped audibly. Phones appeared, as if summoned by magic, capturing the moment when a service dog reminded an entire grocery store what respect looked like. But the salute wasn't a trick. It wasn't entertainment. It was remembrance made visible, honor given form, a bridge between a forgotten generation and a world that had moved on without thanking them properly. Harold's eyes filled with tears he hadn't shed since Martha's funeral. Not from sadness this time, but from something deeper. Pride, recognition, the simple human need to be seen for who you truly are, not dismissed for who you appear to be. Rex lowered his paw and returned to position, professional and calm, as if performing miracles was simply part of his job description, which, in many ways, it was. The grocery store had fallen completely silent, not the uncomfortable silence of before, but something reverent, sacred even. 23 Americans had just witnessed something they'd never forget, something that would change how they saw service dogs, veterans, and the intersection of honor and humility. The teenage cashier's demeanor shifted entirely. Her voice, when it came, was softer, respectful. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't realize. Your dog he's incredible." Harold nodded slowly, one hand resting on Rex's head. "He is. But he's also just doing his job, just like I did mine a long time ago." What happened next would silence every doubter in that store and remind them why some bonds can never be broken, some training never forgotten, and some respect is earned through service that echoes across decades. The transformation in the grocery store was immediate and profound. Word spread through the aisles like ripples on still water. Shoppers abandoned their carts to witness something unprecedented. Store employees emerged from stockrooms and customer service counters. The manager, a middle-aged man named Tom Rodriguez, whose own father had served in Korea, pushed through the growing crowd with tears already forming in his eyes. "Sir," Tom said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine respect, "I need to apologize. For my employee, for anyone who made you feel unwelcome here. That was inexcusable." Harold shook his head slowly. "You don't need to apologize for her, son. She's young. She doesn't know. Most people don't know anymore, and that's not entirely their fault." The crowd pressed closer, but respectfully, reverently. They had witnessed something profound, something that transcended a simple grocery store transaction. This was bigger than checkout lines and discount cards. This was about recognition, remembrance, and the invisible threads that connect service members across generations. Rex remained at perfect attention, his intelligent eyes scanning the faces around them. He could sense the shift in energy, the transformation from impatience to awe. His training had prepared him for this moment, though Harold had never imagined it would happen in such a public setting. How did he learn to do that? A woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harold's weathered face creased into the first genuine smile he'd worn in months. "That's a story worth telling." The crowd leaned in, phones forgotten as Harold began to speak. His voice gained strength with each word, the same voice that had once called cadence for his unit, that had radioed for medical evacuation, that had whispered prayers over fallen friends. "Rex came to me 2 years ago through a program for veterans with PTSD. He was already trained for the basics: blood pressure monitoring, nightmare interruption, crowd navigation. But the salute, that was something we worked on together." Harold's hand found Rex's head, fingers threading through the thick fur. "You see, I wasn't sleeping well after Martha died. The nightmares came back stronger than they had in decades. Rex would wake me up, but I'd be so disoriented, so lost. In the past, that I couldn't ground myself in the present. The grocery store had become a makeshift auditorium. Shoppers sat on produce boxes and leaned against checkout counters. Children peeked around their parents' legs, sensing the gravity of the moment, even if they couldn't fully comprehend it. My therapist suggested we find an anchor, something that would bring me back to reality while honoring where my mind had gone. The salute seemed perfect. It's respectful, it's familiar, and it connects my past service with my present challenges. Tom Rodriguez nodded slowly. His father had never talked much about Korea, but he'd seen the distant look in his eyes. During family gatherings, the way he'd suddenly go quiet when fireworks went off on the 4th of July. But Rex understood something I didn't initially realize. Harold continued, "The salute wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who needed to remember what service means, what sacrifice looks like, what respect should sound like when it's given freely instead of demanded." An elderly woman near the back of the crowd spoke up. "My husband served in Vietnam too. He came home to people spitting on him, calling him terrible names. He never got a welcome home parade." Harold's eyes found hers across the crowd. "Neither did I, ma'am. Most of us didn't. But that's not why we served. We served because it was right, because our country needed us, because that's what Americans do when freedom is threatened." The woman nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He died 5 years ago, lung cancer from Agent Orange." The VA finally acknowledged the connection, but it was too late. The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding. Every person in that store carried stories of service, sacrifice, or loss. Fathers, grandfathers, uncles, brothers who had answered their country's call and returned changed. Some returned with visible wounds, others with invisible scars that lasted decades. That's when Rex did something that changed everything. Without any command from Harold, without any visible cue, the German Shepherd turned toward the elderly woman and repeated his salute. Perfect posture, raised paw, 3-second hold, a salute for her husband, for his service, for her loss. The crowd gasped collectively. This wasn't trained behavior. This was intuition, empathy, recognition of a moment that transcended commands and conditioning. Rex had understood that some honors must be shared, some respect must be given freely, some salutes are for the living and the dead alike. Harold stared at his service dog in amazement. "I never taught him to do that," he whispered. "I never taught him to salute anyone but me." But Rex wasn't finished. With the same deliberate precision, he turned toward Tom Rodriguez, whose father's Korean War service medals hung framed in his office. Another perfect salute. Then toward a young man whose Marine Corps tattoo showed beneath his rolled sleeves. Another salute. One by one, Rex was honoring every veteran and military family member in that grocery store. His training had evolved, beyond commands into something approaching reverence, transforming a simple service dog routine into a ceremony of recognition. The teenagers recording on their phones stopped to wipe their eyes. The impatient customers forgot about their schedules. The grocery store employees abandoned their tasks to witness history being written in real time, one salute at a time. Harold realized that this moment was bigger than his PTSD, bigger than his loneliness, bigger than his need for recognition. This was about healing. Not just his healing, but the healing of a community that had forgotten how to honor its veterans properly. "This is why I trained him," Harold said, his voice carrying across the silent store. "Not just to help me cope with nightmares, but to remind all of us that some things are worth remembering. Some people are worth honoring. Some sacrifices are worth acknowledging, even decades after they were made." The crowd began to applaud, but it wasn't the scattered, polite applause of social obligation. This was sustained, heartfelt recognition, the sound of a community remembering its values, its gratitude, its responsibility to those who served. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe our veterans deserve recognition and respect, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because Harold and Rex's story is just beginning, and what happens next will show you the true power of community when it remembers how to honor its heroes. Rex had been more than a service dog to Harold. He had been a lifeline, a bridge between past and present, a four-legged therapist who understood PTSD in ways that human doctors sometimes missed. But the salute hadn't emerged overnight. It had taken months of patient training, trust building, and mutual understanding. The bond had begun the day Rex arrived at Harold's modest ranch house outside Tucson. The German Shepherd was 3 years old, fully trained in standard service, dog protocols, but there was something in his intelligent amber eyes that suggested deeper capabilities. His previous veteran had passed away, and Rex needed a new mission, a new purpose. Harold had been skeptical initially. He'd lived alone for 2 years since Martha's death, preferring isolation to the complicated dance of social interaction. People asked too many questions or offered sympathy that felt hollow. Rex, however, asked nothing and offered everything. The nightmares had been Harold's most persistent enemy, Vietnam flashbacks that arrived without warning, dragging him back to firebase perimeters and night patrols where shadows moved with deadly intent. Martha used to wake him gently, her soft voice calling him back to safety. Without her, the nightmares lasted longer, felt more real, left him disoriented and shaken. Rex learned to recognize the signs before Harold's conscious mind registered them. Increased heart rate, restless movement, changes in breathing pattern. The dog would wake Harold with gentle persistence, nose nudging his hand, weight pressing against his leg, physical contact that grounded him in the present moment. But Harold needed more than interruption. He needed orientation, a way to bridge the gap between past trauma and present safety. That's when his VA therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, suggested the salute training. "You need an anchor," she had explained during one of their weekly sessions. "Something that honors your service while bringing you back to the present. Something that connects your identity as a soldier with your identity as a survivor." The training began simply. Harold would wake from a nightmare, Rex would provide grounding contact, and Harold would perform a slow, deliberate salute. It was a way of honoring the men he'd lost while acknowledging that he had survived, that he was safe, that the war was over. Rex watched these midnight rituals with intense focus. Dogs are naturally imitative creatures, especially intelligent, breeds like German Shepherds. But Rex's imitation went beyond simple mimicry. He seemed to understand the emotional weight of the gesture, the reverence it contained. The first time Rex raised his paw in response to Harold's salute, both man and dog froze in surprise. It hadn't been commanded or requested. It had been offered, freely, a gesture of solidarity between species, between survivors. "Good boy," Harold had whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Good boy, Rex." From that night forward, the salute became their shared ritual. Harold would wake from nightmares, Rex would provide comfort, and together they would honor the fallen while celebrating the living. It became a ceremony of healing, performed in the quiet darkness of a bedroom in Arizona, witnessed by no one, except the moon and the memories. Harold never imagined their private ritual would become public testimony. He certainly never expected it to happen in a grocery store, in front of strangers who had initially dismissed him as just another inconvenient old man with a dog. But Rex's salutes in the store revealed something profound about the nature of respect and recognition. The gesture wasn't just trained behavior, it was learned empathy. Rex had absorbed not just the mechanics of the salute, but its meaning, its purpose, its power to bridge gaps between people who shared common bonds of service and sacrifice. The elderly woman whose husband had died from Agent Orange exposure watched Rex's salute with tears streaming down her face. She understood that this dog was honoring her husband's memory, acknowledging her loss, recognizing her sacrifice as a military spouse who had waded through deployments and worried through conflicts she couldn't control. Tom Rodriguez saw his father's stoic dignity reflected in Rex's perfect posture. The Korean War veteran who had worked 2 jobs to support his family, who had never complained about frostbite or shrapnel wounds, who had taught his son that duty meant showing up even when showing up was difficult. The young Marine with the tattoo saw brotherhood extended across species lines. Rex's salute acknowledged the invisible bonds between service members, the understanding that some experiences transcend individual differences and create lifelong connections based on shared commitment to something larger than themselves. Each salute was personal and universal simultaneously. Personal because it spoke to individual experiences of service, loss, and sacrifice. Universal because it reminded everyone present that freedom has a cost, that some people volunteer to pay that cost, and that gratitude should be expressed rather then assumed. Harold watched his service dog transform a mundane grocery store into a sacred space. This was what healing looked like when it happened in public, when private pain found communal recognition, when individual stories became collective memory. "He's teaching us," Harold said softly, his voice carrying across the silent store. "Rex is teaching us how to remember properly, how to honor appropriately, how to show respect that costs us nothing but means everything." The crowd nodded in understanding. They were witnessing more than a trained dog performing tricks. They were seeing dignity made visible, respect given form, honor translated into action. The grocery store manager, Tom Rodriguez, made a decision that would change his store's culture permanently. "Sir," he said, addressing Harold with the respect due a veteran, "I want you to know that you and Rex are welcome here anytime, always, and I'm going to make sure every employee understands what we witnessed today." Harold smiled, one hand resting on Rex's head. "Thank you, son. But more importantly, remember this feeling. Remember what it looks like when we honor each other properly. And maybe, just maybe, carry that feeling beyond these store walls." The crowd began to disperse slowly, reluctantly. Many stopped to shake Harold's hand or pat Rex's head. Phone numbers were exchanged. Stories were shared. A grocery store had become a community gathering space, a place where strangers became neighbors united by shared recognition of service and sacrifice. But the most profound transformation was still to come, when Rex's salutes would ripple outward from that Arizona grocery store and remind an entire nation how to honor its veterans properly. The video appeared online within hours. Not the shaky, poorly lit footage typical of viral grocery store encounters, but clear, respectful documentation of Rex's salutes performed with reverent precision. The woman who posted it wasn't seeking attention or controversy. She was sharing something beautiful, something that had restored her faith in human decency and animal intelligence. The caption was simple. "This service dog taught a grocery store full of strangers how to show respect. His owner is a Vietnamese veteran who deserves better than what he initially received today. Watch until the end." The video began with the tense checkout interaction, the dismissive cashier, the impatient customers, but it transformed into something transcendent when Rex performed his first salute, then continued with his spontaneous honors for other veterans and military families in the store. Within 6 hours, the video had been shared 10,000 times. Within 12 hours, it reached 100,000 views. By the end of the week, it had been seen by over 2 million people across multiple platforms, each share accompanied by personal stories of military service, veteran struggles, and the importance of recognizing sacrifice. Comments poured in from across the country. Active duty service members shared the video with their units. Veterans organizations reposted it with messages about dignity and respect. Military families tagged relatives who needed to see proof that their service still mattered to civilians. But the response wasn't limited to military communities. Teachers showed the video in classrooms to discuss respect and empathy. Churches incorporated Harold and Rex's story into sermons about honoring others. Community groups organized discussions about how to better support local veterans. Harold received hundreds of messages through the grocery store, which had become an unofficial forwarding center for correspondence. Letters arrived from school children thanking him for his service. Care packages came from military families who understood the challenges of post-service adjustment. Invitations poured in from veterans organizations wanting to honor both Harold and Rex. The local VA hospital reached out to discuss Harold's experience with service dog therapy. Rex's training techniques became a case study for improving veteran mental health services. Dr. Sarah Chen, Harold's therapist, was invited to speak at conferences about innovative approaches to PTSD treatment. Most remarkably, grocery stores across the country began implementing veteran recognition programs. Employee training included modules on respectful interaction with service members and service dogs. Veterans discount programs were expanded and promoted more prominently. Several major chains created Heroes Shopping Hours with special accommodations for veterans with mobility challenges or PTSD triggers. Tom Rodriguez found himself fielding calls from corporate headquarters, local news stations, and veteran advocacy groups. His small suburban grocery store had become a symbol of community respect for military service. Rather than feeling overwhelmed, he embraced the opportunity to lead by example. "What we learned from Harold and Rex," he told a reporter, "is that respect isn't complicated. It doesn't require special training or expensive programs. It just requires recognizing the humanity and dignity in everyone who enters our store, especially those who have served our country." The store began hosting monthly coffee mornings for local veterans. A bulletin board near the entrance featured photos and stories of community members who had served in various conflicts. Children's drawings thanking veterans for their service decorated the windows during patriotic holidays. Rex became something of a local celebrity, but Harold was careful to maintain boundaries. They weren't performing SEALs seeking attention. They were a veteran and his service dog, living their lives with dignity while helping others understand the importance of respect and recognition. The salute remained special, reserved for meaningful moments rather than casual displays. Rex seemed to understand the difference between genuine recognition and mere spectacle. His intelligence allowed him to read situations, to offer comfort or ceremony as appropriate. Harold began receiving invitations to speak at schools, community centers, and veterans events. Initially reluctant, he gradually accepted opportunities that felt meaningful rather than exploitative. He spoke about service, sacrifice, and the importance of remembering those who had given everything for their country's freedom. Rex doesn't just perform salutes, Harold would tell audiences. He reminds us that respect is a choice, that honor is a decision, that recognizing others' contributions makes us better people and stronger communities. The ripple effects continued expanding. Military museums requested information about Harold's service record for potential exhibits. Documentary filmmakers approached him about sharing his story in greater depth. Publishers inquired about book rights for his experiences, but perhaps the most meaningful response came from other veterans who had felt forgotten, overlooked, or dismissed. They reached out to share their own stories of public indifference, of being treated as inconveniences rather than honored citizens, of struggling to find their place in communities that had moved on from their wars. Harold realized that his grocery store experience had given voice to thousands of veterans who had similar encounters but lacked Rex's dramatic way of commanding attention and respect. His story had become their story. His recognition had become their validation. The young cashier who had initially dismissed Harold requested a private meeting. Her name was Jessica, and she was 19 years old, working her way through community college while supporting her younger siblings. She had never known any veterans personally and had no context for understanding military service or its long-term impacts. "I want to apologize properly," she told Harold during their meeting. "And I want to learn. I want to understand what I didn't understand before." Harold spent an hour with Jessica, sharing not just his own experiences but the broader context of military service, veteran challenges, and the importance of treating all customers with dignity and respect. She listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes. Jessica became one of the store's most veteran-friendly employees, greeting military customers warmly and ensuring their shopping experiences were positive. She enrolled in a local college course about military history and began volunteering at the VA hospital on weekends. Her transformation illustrated the power of education over condemnation, understanding over judgment. Harold had shown her a better way rather than simply criticizing her initial response. The grocery store incident had revealed something profound about American society's relationship with its veterans. Many civilians wanted to show respect and gratitude but lacked understanding of how to do so appropriately. Others had simply forgotten that veterans lived among them, that service didn't end with military discharge, that gratitude required expression rather than assumption. Rex's salutes had bridged that gap, creating a visual representation of honor that transcended words. His actions had reminded everyone present that respect is active rather than passive, that recognition requires intention, that dignity must be offered freely to have genuine meaning. The story continued resonating months after the initial video went viral. Veterans Day ceremonies featured references to Harold and Rex's example. Military recruitment centers use their story to illustrate the lifelong bonds between service members. Service dog training programs incorporated elements of their salute protocol. But for Harold, the most important outcome was personal. The isolation that had defined his life since Martha's death had been replaced by community connection. Phone calls from new friends, invitations to social gatherings, and most importantly, a sense that his service and sacrifice were remembered and valued. Rex had given him more than PTSD management and mobility assistance. The German Shepherd had given him a bridge back to his community, a way to transform private pain into public healing, a method for honoring the past while embracing the present. The grocery store had become their regular shopping destination, but now each visit was a homecoming rather than an ordeal. Employees greeted them warmly, customers approached respectfully, and children asked their parents to explain why the man with the special dog was so important. Harold's life had purpose again, meaning beyond mere survival. He was a bridge between generations, a storyteller who could help younger Americans understand the cost of freedom and the importance of gratitude. Rex was his partner in this mission, a four-legged ambassador for respect and recognition. Together they had transformed a moment of dismissal into a movement of dignity, a grocery store encounter into a national conversation about how America treats its veterans. Their story proved that individual actions could create collective change, that respect could be contagious, and that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. The morning sun streamed through Harold's kitchen window as he prepared Rex's breakfast. 6 months had passed since their grocery store encounter, and life had settled into a rhythm that balanced newfound purpose with cherished routine. The phone still rang regularly with interview requests and speaking invitations, but Harold had learned to be selective, choosing opportunities that honored veterans rather than exploited them. Rex waited patiently by his food bowl, tail wagging softly. The German Shepherd had adapted to his celebrity status with characteristic grace, never losing sight of his primary mission as Harold's service dog while embracing his role as an ambassador for veteran recognition. Their morning walk took them through the neighborhood where Harold had lived for 15 years, but only recently begun to truly know. Neighbors waved from porches and gardens. Children asked to pet Rex with appropriate respect, and the mailman always had time for conversation about Harold's latest speaking engagement or community involvement. The transformation extended beyond personal relationships. Harold had been invited to join the city's Veterans Affairs Committee, helping to develop programs that addressed the practical and emotional needs of local veterans. His insights, combined with Rex's demonstrated ability to bridge communication gaps, had led to innovative approaches to veteran community integration. The grocery store had become a model for veteran-friendly businesses. Tom Rodriguez had been promoted to regional manager, partly due to his leadership in creating inclusive customer service protocols. The store hosted monthly events that connected veterans with community resources, employment opportunities, and social activities. Jessica, the cashier who had initially dismissed Harold, had become one of his strongest advocates. She was finishing her associate degree and planned to pursue a career in veterans services. Her transformation from indifferent teenager to passionate advocate illustrated the power of education and personal connection to create lasting change. The ripple effects had spread far beyond Arizona. Harold received letters from veterans across the country who had been inspired by his story to seek help for PTSD, to reconnect with their communities, or to share their own experiences of service and sacrifice. Rex's salutes had given them permission to be proud of their service again, to expect respect rather than simply hoping for it. Military families sent photos of their own service dogs performing salutes, learned from online videos that Harold had helped create. The gesture had become a symbol of connection across the military community, a way for veterans of different eras and conflicts to acknowledge their shared bonds. Dr. Sarah Chen had published research based on Harold and Rex's therapeutic partnership, contributing to improved understanding of how service dogs could address complex PTSD symptoms. Their salute protocol had been adapted for use with other veterans, always with appropriate respect for its origins and meaning. The documentary about Harold's life was nearing completion. The filmmakers had spent months capturing not just his Grocery store moment of recognition, but the deeper story of his military service, his struggles with post-war adjustment, his love for Martha, and his partnership with Rex. The film promised to be more than entertainment. It would be education about veteran experiences and the power of community support. Harold had also begun writing his memoir, with assistance from a ghostwriter who understood military history and veteran psychology. The book would explore themes of service, sacrifice, and the importance of remembering those who had given everything for their country's freedom. Rex's story would be woven throughout, illustrating how the bonds between humans and animals could facilitate healing and connection. Most importantly, Harold had found his voice as a veteran advocate. His speaking engagements had evolved from simple storytelling to powerful calls for improved veteran services, community recognition, and intergenerational understanding. He spoke at high schools about the realities of military service, at corporate events about hiring veterans, and at community forums about creating inclusive environments for all citizens. Rex remained his constant companion and collaborator, performing salutes at appropriate moments but never allowing the gesture to become routine or meaningless. The German Shepherd seemed to understand that their mission was sacred, that respect required intentionality, and that their story belonged to all veterans who had ever felt forgotten or dismissed. The grocery store encounter had taught Harold that individual moments of recognition could create collective change. One person showing respect could inspire others to do the same. One service dog salute could remind an entire community of their obligations to those who had served. Harold's morning routine now included time for correspondence with other veterans, planning for upcoming speaking engagements, and quiet moments with Rex that honored their private relationship beyond their public mission. The German Shepherd was more than a celebrity service dog. He was Harold's partner in life, his companion in healing, his bridge between past trauma and present purpose. As they returned from their neighborhood walk, Harold reflected on the journey from isolation to community connection. Martha would have been proud of how he had transformed his pain into purpose, his struggles into service to others. She had always believed that Harold had more to give the world than he realized. Rex settled into his favorite spot by Harold's reading chair, intelligent eyes alert but peaceful. The morning light caught the gray threads in Harold's hair and the silver touches around Rex's muzzle, reminders that both veteran and service dog were aging gracefully together. Harold opened his mail, finding the usual mix of speaking invitations, thank you letters from veterans, and updates from organizations that had been inspired by their story. One letter caught his attention immediately. It was from a young soldier recently returned from Afghanistan, struggling with nightmares and social isolation, requesting advice about service dog programs. Harold smiled as he began his response. This was why their story mattered, why Rex's salutes had resonated across the country, why individual acts of respect could create lasting change. Every veteran deserved recognition, support, and the understanding that their service had meaning beyond their years in uniform. The phone rang, interrupting his letter writing. It was Tom Rodriguez, calling with news that their grocery store had been selected as the site for a National Veterans Day ceremony. The event would honor not just Harold and Rex, but all local veterans who had served their country with distinction. Harold, Tom's voice carried excitement and reverence in equal measure. The mayor wants to present you with the key to the city. The governor is sending a representative, and the American Legion is organizing a parade that will end right here in our parking lot. Harold listened quietly, one hand absently stroking Rex's head. The German Shepherd sensed the importance of the conversation. His amber eyes focused on Harold's face with the same intensity he brought to monitoring PTSD episodes or crowd navigation challenges. That's quite an honor, Tom, Harold replied, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his chest. But you know it's not about me, right? It's about all of us. Every veteran who has ever felt invisible, forgotten, or dismissed. Rex and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right skills to remind people what respect looks like. Tom nodded on the other end of the line, though Harold couldn't see it. That's exactly why they chose you, sir. Because you understand that individual recognition serves a larger purpose. The ceremony isn't just about celebrating your service. It's about committing our community to better supporting all veterans. The Veterans Day ceremony was 3 weeks away, but planning had already begun. The grocery store would be transformed into a venue worthy of national attention. Media outlets from across the country had requested coverage rights. Military honor guards were coordinating their participation. Local schools were preparing presentations about the importance of veteran recognition. Harold felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, but it was a familiar burden. Leadership had always meant carrying other people's hopes and expectations, whether as a sergeant in Vietnam or as an inadvertent spokesperson for veteran dignity in civilian life. Rex shifted position slightly, pressing closer to Harold's leg. The dog's training allowed him to sense emotional changes before they became overwhelming. Harold's stress levels were elevated but manageable. The German Shepherd remained alert but calm, ready to provide support if needed. "Tom," Harold said, "carefully, I want you to know that I'm honored by this recognition, but I also want to make sure we don't lose sight of why it matters. This isn't about making me feel good or making your store look good. It's about changing how our community treats all veterans, not just the ones who happen to have dogs that can salute." The grocery store manager understood. His father's Korean War service had taught Tom that real honor came through service to others, not personal glorification. "Absolutely, sir. The ceremony will include presentations about local veteran services, resources for military families, and commitments from businesses and organizations to create more veteran-friendly policies." Harold appreciated Tom's understanding, but he also felt the familiar anxiety that came with public attention. Fame had never been his goal. Recognition for veterans generally had been his purpose. The challenge was maintaining that distinction while accepting individual honors that could serve broader advocacy goals. Rex performed his evening routine of checking door locks and window latches, a behavior that provided Harold with security and peace of mind. The German Shepherd's presence had eliminated most of Harold's nighttime anxiety, replacing hypervigilance with trusted partnership. As Harold prepared for bed, he reflected on the journey from that confrontational grocery store morning to this moment of community celebration. The transformation had been profound and unexpected, driven by a service dog's intuitive understanding of human dignity and the power of respectful recognition. The next 3 weeks passed quickly, filled with planning meetings, media interviews, and coordination with veteran organizations. Harold insisted that local veterans be central to the ceremony, not peripheral to it. Their stories would be shared, their service would be honored, and their ongoing needs would be addressed through concrete community commitments. Rex's role in the ceremony was carefully planned to honor his contribution while maintaining the dignity of his service. He would perform salutes for fallen veterans, living service members, and military families, but the gestures would be part of a larger program of recognition and remembrance. The morning of Veterans Day dawned clear and cold, typical Arizona, weather that reminded Harold of certain mornings in Vietnam when the jungle humidity hadn't yet built to unbearable levels. He dressed carefully in his service uniform, medals polished and ribbons aligned with military precision. Rex wore a special ceremonial vest, donated by the service dog organization that had trained him. The vest featured embroidered patches honoring all branches of military service, a visual reminder that respect transcends individual loyalties and encompasses all who have served. They arrived at the grocery store to find it transformed into something approaching a cathedral of remembrance. American flags lined the parking lot. A stage had been erected near the entrance where Harold had first been dismissed 6 months earlier. Military honor guards from multiple service branches stood at attention, representing the continuity of service across generations. The crowd was remarkable in its diversity and size. Veterans from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan gathered alongside military families, community leaders, and ordinary citizens who had been moved by Harold and Rex's story. Children held handmade signs thanking veterans for their service. Teenagers who had initially shared the viral video now understood its deeper significance. Harold took his place on the stage, Rex beside him in perfect military bearing. The German Shepherd's presence calmed Harold's nerves, while symbolizing the partnership between veterans and the support systems that helped them thrive in civilian life. The ceremony began with a color guard presentation and the national anthem, sung by a local high school choir with voices that soared above the desert landscape. Harold felt tears forming as he remembered Martha's love for patriotic music and her pride in his military service. The mayor spoke about community responsibility to veterans. The governor's representative read a proclamation declaring the grocery store a Veterans Recognition Landmark. Military chaplains offered prayers for fallen service members and blessings for those still serving. But the most powerful moment came when Harold was invited to speak. He stood slowly, Rex rising with him, and approached the microphone with the same deliberate precision he had used to approach enemy positions decades earlier. 6 months ago, I was just an old man with a dog, trying to buy groceries and feeling invisible, Harold began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd. Today, I stand before you not because I'm special, but because Rex reminded all of us that respect doesn't cost anything, but means everything. He paused, looking across the sea of faces that represented his community, his neighbors, his fellow Americans. This ceremony isn't about me. It's about remembering that freedom has a cost, that some people volunteer to pay that cost, and that gratitude must be expressed rather than assumed. Rex seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Without any command, the German Shepherd moved to Harold's side and performed a slow, deliberate salute that held for exactly 3 seconds. The crowd gasped, then fell into reverent silence. That salute represents every veteran who has ever felt forgotten, Harold continued, his voice gaining strength. Every military family that has sacrificed for our security. Every service member who came home changed by their experiences. Rex isn't just honoring me, he's honoring all of us who answered our country's call. Harold's speech continued for 10 minutes, weaving together themes of service, sacrifice, community responsibility, and the importance of recognizing dignity in all citizens. He spoke about Martha's support during his darkest moments, about the veterans who didn't make it home, about the obligation each generation has to remember and honor those who served. When he finished, the applause was sustained and heartfelt. But more importantly, the ceremony had achieved its purpose of connecting individual recognition with collective commitment to veteran support. The remainder of the event featured presentations from local organizations about veteran services, commitments from businesses to hire more veterans, and announcements about expanded mental health resources for military families. Harold's story had catalyzed concrete improvements in veteran support throughout the community. As the ceremony concluded, Rex performed one final salute directed toward the section of the crowd where World War II veterans sat in honor chairs. These men, now in their late 90s, represented the last living links to America's greatest generation. Their presence reminded everyone that veteran recognition was time-sensitive, that gratitude delayed might become gratitude denied. Harold shook hands with hundreds of people following the ceremony. Veterans shared their own stories of service and struggle. Military families expressed gratitude for his advocacy. Community members committed to better supporting local veterans through volunteering, donations, and simple recognition of their contributions. The grocery store, once a site of dismissal and indifference, had become a landmark of respect and remembrance. Tom Rodriguez announced that the store would maintain a permanent veteran recognition display and continue hosting monthly community events for military families. Jessica, the cashier whose initial dismissal had sparked the entire chain of events, presented Harold with a scrapbook she had created documenting the transformation of the store and community. Her journey from indifference to advocacy represented the broader change that was possible when people were educated rather than condemned. As the crowd dispersed and equipment was removed, Harold and Rex stood quietly in the parking lot where their viral moment had begun. The German Shepherd seemed to understand that their mission was evolving rather than ending. Recognition had been achieved. Now the work of sustaining that recognition would continue. Harold reflected on the journey. From isolation to community leadership, Rex had given him more than PTSD management. The service dog had provided a bridge back to purpose, meaning, and connection. Their partnership had demonstrated that healing could be individual and collective simultaneously. The sun was setting. Over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Harold of certain evenings in Vietnam when beauty persisted despite surrounding hardships. He had survived that war, survived the difficult transition home, survived Martha's death, and emerged as an advocate for veterans who deserved better recognition and support. Rex pressed against Harold's leg, a gesture of comfort and partnership that needed no commands or training. They were bonded by shared mission, mutual respect, and the understanding that some relationships transcend simple owner-pet dynamics to become true partnerships in service to others. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to advocate for veterans, new speaking engagements, new chances to ensure that respect and recognition continued flowing toward those who had served. Harold was no longer an invisible old man with a dog. He was a voice for veterans everywhere who deserved dignity, honor, and community support. The grocery store lights dimmed as employees completed their closing routines. The sight of Harold's initial dismissal had become the launching point for his advocacy career. Rex's spontaneous salutes had reminded an entire community of their obligations to veterans and demonstrated the power of respect to transform individual moments into collective movements. Harold and Rex walked slowly toward their car, the German, Shepard maintaining his professional demeanor while displaying the subtle signs of satisfaction that came from mission accomplished. They had proven that individual actions could create lasting change, that respect could be contagious, and that sometimes the most important lessons came from unexpected teachers. Their story would continue resonating long after the cameras stopped rolling and the crowds went home. Veterans across the country had been inspired to seek help, demand respect, and share their own stories of service and sacrifice. Communities had been challenged to do better by those who had served, and one very special service dog had reminded, "Everyone that honor comes in many forms, some of them four-legged and unconditionally loyal." As they drove home through the desert evening, Harold reached over to pat Rex's head. "Good job today, partner," he said softly. "Martha would have been proud of both of us." Rex's tail wagged slightly, the only acknowledgement needed between partners who had found their purpose in service to others and recognition of dignity in all who had answered their country's call. If this story of respect, recognition, and the unbreakable bond between a veteran and his service dog has moved you, please take a moment to comment below about a veteran in your life who deserves recognition. Because sometimes the greatest honor we can give is simply remembering that freedom isn't free, and those who paid its price deserve our gratitude every single day, not just on Veterans Day.